Apologies to everyone that's been waiting. We've had some tech issues, many of which were my fault, and some of which I'm going to blame on Mark Zuckerberg. So we'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, right. Well, we should launch in about your book then. Let's get talking
Let's do
about
it. Let's
this
get this party
beauty.
started. Let's get this
Yeah.
party restarted.
Yeah, let's get this party restarted. Well, I will say if for whomever may have heard or didn't hear, but what an honor it is and a privilege to be able to speak with you um, on the birthday of your most recent book, Red, White, and Blues. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And what a privilege. I'm so happy to be able to talk with you about this book. And mostly, I wanted to talk with one of the things I really wanted to talk with, having read the three preceding books in this series, and I will call it a series because they are connected, is this book for me makes some moves that the other books haven't, or maybe the poems, or maybe your way of looking at it, what these all of these poems are kind of what you're wrestling with in all these poems. Maybe you have reached to a different place or come to a maturity in it. Um, so I'm really thrilled to talk with you about the poems and the way that this book, and maybe I'll just pose this as a question. How do you see this book in relation to the three books with the blues theme? How do you see this connecting with those three and speaking, in conversation with them?
Well, it's a great question to start with, and let me just say, Justin, it's absolutely my pleasure to be here. And as we said in the green room, and then the whatever the room between the green room and live is, there are very few, if any, people I'd rather talk about poetry, period, or writing, or community, or craft. So it's very meaningful for me. This is, I think, our third. We've talked on numbers of occasions, but I think you've been there for all three of my virtual book launches. So this is just like this is family, and there's nowhere I'd rather be and no one I'd rather be with. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's a continuation. That I describe this as a large ongoing project, which is literally true. The poems thus far have kind of been organized around certain themes. The first three leaned heavily on, musical and pop cultural figures. This one is a very focused look at politicians, politics, and kind of mythical figures. But there are still, as we can discuss, some pop culture icons that make their way in. And I wouldn't, don't force their way in, but I think the project as a whole, although it is global at times, is really a concentrated look at America, primarily the 20th century, and how we receive our myths, how stories get told, and where I've let the icons themselves do a lot of the heavy lifting in previous ones. In this one, I'm trying to get inside situations or people and talk about America and mythology and empire through kind of some seminal events or seminal figures. So I do see it as a connecting thing, but I think and as the title indicates, it's a very American book that tries to take a deeper look at politics and where we find ourselves now.
Yeah. So I'm glad you pointed out that some of like what you were leaning into in the first couple of books, the music, the pop culture, especially a lot of jazz musicians. And I would say by and large, a lot of people I think that you idolized or that you felt like didn't get their due. And to your credit, I mean, for me as a reader, I got I got an education reading those earlier books too. Musicians, artists, people in pop culture that I wasn't that familiar with, and it gave me an avenue into their lives, into the things they struggled with, and into the injustices as well that have happened and to them. And this book, as you were saying, it leans more into politics, and so I guess I feel like there was more of that you were taking some things on in this. And it's not to say in the earlier books that you weren't in defending, I think, and giving voice to, if I could say that, to people that should be acknowledged. But in this one, it's like you turned it around on some people, I think. And if maybe you talk about that, if that was
Yeah,
how you feel
well,
about
you
that.
you just Yeah, you just put it really nicely, Justin, in a way I haven't really like it is so succinctly, which is in the first three collections, there are quite a few individuals that I'm kind of eulogizing or trying to celebrate as underdogs or underappreciated icons, and I'm trying to give them a little more love and a little more space. This book, if someone, especially a Gen Xer, looks at the table of contents, there actually are very few people they won't recognize, and so that's partly because they're in the political realm, but it is an attempt to really punch up at some very powerful, mostly white masculine figures and take them on. And as I guess as I've described a little bit on my Substack and when I've talked about these books, what the conceit of this series is really trying to talk about politics, storytelling, narrative, cultural, moments, and do it in a way where you're taking an individual like moment or an individual's life or a foible and use that as the metaphor as a jumping
Hmm.
off point.
Hmm.
So, as someone that has written a lot of nonfiction and fiction about these issues, there's something different and very satisfying about a topic, say like a Trump or a Musk, that could and should take volumes and try to get that into one page is both the challenge and I think the reward because it's more of a it's more of a punch than like a long ballet.
Yeah. Well, you open with the William Carlos Williams line about you don't get news. Paraphrase, but you can't get news from poetry. But people die every day from for a lack of what is found in poetry. How do you feel specifically that poetry is equipped? You're saying getting these, taking on somebody like Columbus or Custer or Kissinger in one page in a succinct, it's not a news story, it's not an essay, it's a poem. How do you feel like poetry is equipped to be able to take on um, a character like this or an instant, a moment in American history with a poem?
I think that what poets, and I'll say, by the way, won't be the first compliment I pay you, aside from being a great friend, you're also a great poet, so you know this. The economy of words, the economy of form, before you even put a word on the page, trying to write a poem, there's this impetus to distill and pare away and get rid of excess. And I've argued, I certainly felt in the last 10 years, especially that while we do need, I've written some op-eds and essays, like we need them, we want them, we learn from them. They all can exist. Novels, we need that. We need movies, we need music. But there's something about a poem that, especially in an era where we're inundated with information, you can throw a rock and hit an op-ed about Trump or MAGA or, et cetera, et cetera. And so, in some ways, I think the fact that these topics are so ubiquitous, it inoculates them because people are like, I've heard, yeah, I know, yeah. So Trump bankrupted a casino and he was a joke before The Apprentice. Yeah, 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 I get it, I get it. Well, some people don't get it, and saying the same thing, however articulate or eloquent a fashion, will fall on deaf ears. I think poetry, especially if someone doesn't have a lot of time to read, it's an opportunity to get in there and in very quick order render a judgment. Whether it's agreed with or not is almost irrelevant to me.
Mhm.
It's more you're going to come away from each one of these poems knowing exactly what's trying to be said, and hopefully there's enough wordplay and fun and knowledge within that economy that you're getting a little bit more than just a poem, something you could maybe
Yeah.
return to, or you are getting maybe a little mini history lesson. So
Yeah.
there's a lot going on, but what's fun and challenging is that you don't have a lot of room to work with.
Yeah, I have to say I enjoyed that immensely about these poems. You are not shying away from taking things on, taking people on, taking moments of American history on, taking on our prevailing stories of people who
Yeah,
really shouldn't be made into heroes.
right.
And but you do it in a way that it's like I feel like there are these little, if I was looking at a brick wall and I could pull out a brick and look, I have a deeper look behind the wall that has been, erected around a person or whatever. You have these moments, and usually it's wordplay, it's something fun, funny, witty, but also something cultural, the way that you turn a phrase that points us to other things perhaps that were going on at the same time, or an allusion to a movie or a song or a lyrics in a song. So at I both I feel like the poems are punchy and they're tough, but they're also there's fun in them and creativity and wit and the language is fun. So I find myself as I was reading this book, kind of seeing what Sean's doing in some of these poems, kind of anticipating and looking for those in other poems. And when I see those, places where I could remove the brick and get a deeper view and another perspective, it was a moment of pleasure and joy in reading these.
Well, I'm glad and grateful to hear that. And I'll say that another thing that for me as the writer, what I'm having fun with in this series is I also think there's a wonderful tension between trying to write something right that is very plain, very easy to understand, so that there's little ambiguity, but for the person that's already familiar with the individual or the moment, or again, I keep saying for us Gen Xers, or at least people of a certain age that pre-digital, where a lot of these people lived and were mythologized, the wordplay and the associations can conjure up an era, and that's a very deliberate attempt to pack in that information, and then that kind of cultural baggage also does some heavy lifting for the poet. And so I think I've found a way to utilize that aforementioned economy, but also cram it in with just enough kind of cultural language that we're really getting a sense of not just, say, an individual or an event or a seminal moment, but what was going on and what was it like, how was that received by the public, or how does that feel seeing it with fresh eyes 50 or 100 years later. And I think what we all know, especially those of us, liberal arts majors that took certain classes in college, you understand what it means to interrogate myths. Doesn't mean that they're all fake or that
Yeah.
they're all evil, but it means looking deeply and seeing what context is and who wrote those mythologies and who
Oh, yeah.
perpetuated them. And once you're getting into that, there's just a lot going on. And so for me, what's easier than taking some of our worst human beings and saying, what is it about these people that we should study and learn from?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that about who writes these stories, who's telling these stories, and that who's creating the myth that we are all believing in, or choosing to believe in, or not choosing to believe in. That reminds me specifically of the poem Howard Dean's Scream, and the way that you turn that poem to, I felt like for me, to understanding how this really shouldn't have been, especially given the context about what this current president can do all the time, how a little off scream just ruined an entire presidential candidate.
Yeah.
Because why? And the stories that were spun about that. Um, I mean, it seems so childish and naive in hindsight. But anyway, that just wanted to point that out about what you did in that poem. And I told Sean before we went live that part of what I wanted to do talking with him about this book is to ask questions about, like, what questions did I have about the book. And one of the questions I had is, you organize it chronologically
Yeah.
through history, starting with Adam and moving through, Jeff Bezos essentially, so up to current time. What was
Yeah.
the choice? Why did you decide to organize the I know you probably didn't write the book that way and write the
Right.
poems in that
No.
order. So how did you land on that, and why?
That's a great question. I think once I started to organize the collection, because someone else had asked me, had you written the other three collections and then wrote all these poems? And the answer is no. Some of these poems, a lot of them are newer, and some of them are very new, but some of them go back quite a while. So I knew that for a variety of reasons, good or bad, they might not have fit with the flow of previous books, or when we were going heavily into jazz and some of those figures might have been a bit jarring. When I started to get a sense of, wow, I have enough material here that's really kind of political, that lane of politics and culture, it started to make sense to then say, if we're going to take a deeper look at myth, American myth, and then American male myth, which unfortunately, and we're getting better in the 21st century, but if you look at myth in the 20th century, it's almost invariably white and male. So that alone is a story that needs to be unpacked. How many stories weren't told? How many figures should we be emulating that never had a chance? But once I realized we're kind of taking like we do start with Adam, the origin myth, in
Hmm.
many regards.
Hmm.
But once we really kind of locate the 20th century, the
Yeah.
bulk of the book is like, let's run through this century as we learned how to, as we became electric and then digital, and these same types of men and powerful people
Hmm.
tend to be in positions of power and authority and influence, and in so many cases were responsible for their own hype. And to me, it just made a certain sense to do it chronologically so we could see. And you just mentioned, I think we look at something like Howard Dean that could have been dissected and discussed. I know it was at the time, but just 22 years later, we look back and go, ah, what an innocent time. At the time, we thought this is post 9/11, things are crazy. So it just shows on this continuum that some things stay the same, but we're getting more and more surreal, and this tenuous relationship to truth, and integrity isn't getting any better.
Yeah. When you're talking about the myths, something you were just saying about, the ones who tell the story, or the ones who create the story, and sometimes they're not even on the scene. And I think about the poem Muhammad Ali's Induction, because
Mm.
to me there was such an ominous the faces in the crowd, right? Um, Ringside, so to speak, literally and figuratively, making Muhammad Ali, and also then when he did not go to Vietnam,
Yeah.
when he resisted that and that story, how that was such a backlash against him from those same people that made him. And I feel like that's what you're speaking to, like that myth, those mythologizers
Yeah.
make and break so many. And anyway, in that poem particularly, I felt it was haunting the way that you depicted that.
I appreciate you saying that, and I'll say, I in terms of like, I just the way you described it is kind of harrowing to me. I didn't dare try to imagine. Oh, it's not difficult to imagine, but writing that poem, I didn't try to go into kind of Ollie's headspace and what it might have looked
No,
like being in
right,
the ring, but
right.
more the metaphor of, well, actually, I take that back. It's not a metaphor. The reality of an audience that you're entertaining. You're
Yeah,
the heavyweight champion of the world, which in American culture, generally, at least up to Tyson, right? You were like, that was second only to president. You were the heavyweight champ. Like that used to imbue like a lifetime. You were a made man in this country. But if you're a black man, there's this collective voice that's there to say, yes, you're entertaining us. And in fact, I bet money on you getting your brains beat in and made money on you, but don't step out of line, boy, or we're there's so much there. So his courageousness to speak out against the war and what it cost him. Um, and then you've got probably, presumably upper middle class white men in the audience who didn't want to go to war either, but would castigate or keep out someone for both racial and political reasons. Once you get into that kind of onion and start
oh
unpeeling
yeah,
it, there's a lot there. But it was that moment of him being stripped of his title to show what real sacrifice is and real kind of courage is.
yeah,
So I think it does resonate today, but it's a reminder of an era where you could be heavyweight champion and easily be arrested or imprisoned just because you needed to be put in your place, and that is really painful to consider as an American.
yeah, yeah. So you say in the author's note there are some powerful lines, I found powerful and profound, and I wanted to ask you about um, the line you write, where power learns to hide and where harm learns to look inevitable. And what are you speaking to there?
I think when you get the mythology right, And to take it just comes to mind. I could take Reagan, but I just thinking about Trump. There's so much there that we're going to be writing about him for centuries, which I think he would
Mhm.
love. But one reality, no matter what side of the fence politically, culturally you sit on, he had been and was a laughing stock in high society for decades because he bankrupted a casino, which is almost impossible to do. But The Apprentice, which was also coinciding with reality TV, reconstructed this myth that made him not just seem like a successful businessman, but it cast this where people even that didn't really like him would say things like, he might be gruff and he might be boorish, but the guy's a genius. The guy's a business genius. That's how power and myth work together. And then where it goes to hide is, oh, but he's harmless. He's just this, he's like our crazy uncle that just says things. And the reality is, he's doing terrible things. I invoke Reagan to say, or W. Bush or Rumsfeld to say, standing in front of a flag and looking solemn can get you a lot of mileage, even if you're making decisions to send people to war, which, as we're having this conversation, is literally going on, in our discourse right now. But
Yeah,
that's another way that power can hide by saying the we believe in a strong America. We salute our soldiers, but it's the same innocent boys that are being sent over to fight for these games that wealthy, powerful men are playing. And that's not even an American lesson. That's a world
yeah,
history lesson. But
yeah.
it seems that we'll never learn from that.
Wow. So so is art, is poetry an antidote? Is it a way of, do you see it as a way of being able to take control of our own myth making, of myth making for our culture? I mean, how does this work?
Well, so what jumps to mind is one of my, and I know millions of other human beings' favorite poems, Ozymandias by Shelley. The person that Shelley wrote about, this king was a real person, or at the very least based on a real. The fact that we know Shelley, and here I am quoting his work centuries later, and no
Right.
one knows the king. So, but literally, what he describes in the poem of the statues and monuments he built to himself being dust in the desert, which again, t thinking about what we're living through right now, history repeating itself, these monuments to ego. But the fact that what he put down in one page, right, a very short poem is such a devastating indictment of power and the mendacity of self myth and corruption, but also speaks to but human beings, most of us connecting to story and community and not having power. These words resonate and remind us like we're a lot more alike with Shelley, the human being, than we are with some of these men that we venerate in history books. So I think history, and speaking of Shelley, he also said poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. That was his way of saying poetry endures and poetry is a way to hold people accountable. I certainly don't on any level, even in my wildest dreams, have any illusions that anything I write is going to change anything for the better. But it is a way, if someone is creatively endowed or interested, to try to get in the record and stand up and be counted. So personally, I believe poetry is very powerful, but I think culturally and through all world history, our poets and writers have always stood up against corruption and greed and war. And so that's what connects us as human beings.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what I appreciate about this whole series. And I think, again, what I was saying, maybe not so art didn't articulate very well at the beginning, was that the maturity of this series, and not to say that the early poems weren't mature, but I think you've, over the course of these four books now, that the voice and what you're, it's like this is a flag in the ground. These poems, it's
Yeah.
a statement,
Yeah.
and And yet the beauty of it is they work as poems. So I don't feel like I'm
Yeah.
just reading, a rant by any
Yeah.
means. I'm reading poetry. I'm reading something that's been well crafted and has beautiful language. And um, as I mentioned before, they're funny and the wordplay is exciting and
Yeah.
surprising. So we still get all of those things that we love about poetry, musicality, etc. And yet, you are willing, or you do plant a flag and make a stand. So
Yeah.
appreciate that.
I think some of the, the decision to turn back, or that's a, no, I didn't turn back to poetry, but jumping wholeheartedly into kind of the poetic form, it wasn't that much of a coincidence that at least some of that impulse was feeling like, again, I think countless, not only fellow writers, but just fellow humans are between the digital devices, what's been happening in America in particular, but just everything that's going on in the world, right? And now AI, like we're just buffeted with content and competition for our attention. Empathy is now, a buzzword like that, especially if you're a so-called Christian, like empathy is should be the number, like that should be the easiest thing to invoke and lionize. So we're in this moment where I love the idea that via a blog or Substack or social media, anyone can have a voice. And I love that. I love the democratization of anyone being able to self-publish a book. Like that's all to the good, but it does run the risk of just being another teardrop in this ocean of stuff. So for me, again, poetry is a way of kind of a very modest way of putting a flag down and saying, I want to say something about this topic and I want it to stay said. And I'm putting a pressure on myself to do it one time, one in, one out, and then I'm not going to write about it again. Which isn't to say literally I won't, but
Yeah.
because as you know, Charles Mingus seems to come up over and over again for a variety of
Yeah.
reasons. But in terms of taking on, especially a political figure, it's so satisfying to me to feel like I want to get that person in my sights and somehow say what I need to say that in a way that might both encourage and resonate with other sensitive people. And to me, that's a good enough goal. If it does other things, which again, I don't even know what I mean by that, but I don't think it can do much more. But if it does, sure. But if it's able to resonate with other people that are feeling overwhelmed and sensitive, and frustrated, what more can we ask of ourselves?
Yeah. This might be a slight detour, but talking about the democratization and all that is constantly we're constantly getting things. It's like a tidal wave all the time
Yeah.
of information, of people wanting attention, and things
Yeah.
shouting for our attention, or clamoring for our attention, and all the ways our attention can be siphoned.
Yeah.
And I know, in talking with a lot of writers and working with a lot of writers, that some people are just like, what's the point? Like, why should I?
Yeah.
What do I have to add to any of this? And I feel like, on the one hand, the democratization, the ways that we can get our work out there are more than they've ever been by far, the
Yeah.
opportunities.
Yeah.
And yet it feels like, in some ways, that it's just getting drowned out. And so I love hearing it. It excites me also to hear you say, and I feel like this has always been something that's been burning in me, is like, but we still are a personal witness to what is happening, and that counts for something. That is not
Yes.
for nothing. And that goes back to what you're talking about, Shelley. Like, he exists. We remember him, and we don't remember the powerful person he's writing
Yeah.
about. That person's been
Yeah.
forgotten. So
Yeah.
again, it's a detour, but I kind of
No.
want to tell the people that I work with, the writers that I work with, who want it, or the artists who are
Yeah.
maybe giving up hope, like, no, we need this more than ever. Perhaps we still need the witness, the personal witness.
Two things, Justin. That's so great, and that's so you, and you're so modest. Like, by the way, folks, if this is your first introduction to Justin, I'll be including links so you can check him out. But he, in addition to being a writer and an artist and a photographer, is an amazing teacher and organizer, and encourages people to find their voice. What you just said, to me, they're on the same continuum, which is why write? Why, who needs art is the same type of question that's like, well, why vote? What difference does it make? And it's like, it might not make a difference, but you know what definitely makes a difference if you don't do it.
Hmm.
We know what's going to happen if no one picks up a pen or no one goes into a voting booth. And my conviction is that is precisely what the people in power want. And that to me is what connects Shelley to Orwell to, Christopher Hitchens to what you and I are doing and so many millions of others is bearing witness. And I love that you use that word because I think poetry, if nothing else, is just a human being saying, I saw or I responded, and this in words is my way of paying homage or bearing witness. But one thing I'm convinced of is that powerful people absolutely, more than subservience, want apathy. And so we cannot allow that to happen.
Hmm. Beautifully said. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
So we're here for poetry. Let's hear some work. I know I personally had a request, but
Okay.
before we get to that, could maybe you have something that you would like to read that maybe one of your favorites or something that's speaking to what have been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to find a short one to keep it somewhat real. Well, I mentioned Mingus, so
Mhm.
I'll always take any opportunity because if all I've done with these collections is maybe turn a handful of people on to Charles Mingus, the jazz musician, a personal hero, then I'm doing my work, or I'm beginning to pay him back for the way he's enriched my life.
Which one of these are you going to read?
So I think I'll read Charles Mingus's Metaphor,
Okay, great.
which is on
I
page 12.
okay, and I'll just say before you read this that when I read these poems, Mingus poems, I immediately went onto iTunes and downloaded his work and listened to the poem you write before
Yeah,
in Charles Mingus's Cry. I listened to
yeah,
that song specifically, and then after the next poem, I downloaded that and that album. So I thank you to that.
yeah.
You introduced me to something that was really really magical. So anyway,
Amazing. Thank you for that. So, by way of introduction, and again, I'll be very brief because if anyone knows me knows like, oh, he's talking about Mingus again. Yes, I am. But Charles Mingus is, along with Duke Ellington and a handful of others, Thelonious Monk, Miles Davis, Wayne Shorter. But Mingus is one of the preeminent jazz composers and musicians of the 20th century, and living when he did, his prime being the early 50s through the mid 60s, had to overcome the same things Ali and so many others did, which was to make a living as an artist, very difficult. To make a living as a black musician during the civil rights era, extraordinarily difficult. And he did it with grace and defiance. But he was very political in his music. So I
mm-hmm.
love writing about him because he inspires me. Um, so and I've written a poem about just what he did in 1957. Mingus put out 5 albums that year, which is so astonishing. It still just warrants its own conversation in terms of the human achievement. But the first of those 5 was an album called The Clown. And if you look at the cover, which I encourage you to do after this, or if you go check out the music online, the album from 1957 is called The Clown. Um, this is a poem about the album title, the song, and what I think was going on in Mingus's head. Charles Mingus made 5 albums in 1957, and the first one he recorded was The Clown. He called it The Clown because the title track was also a mission statement. He called it The Clown because he knew artists sometimes frighten the people who pay them. He called it The Clown because he cherished the dividends an apt metaphor can provide. He called it The Clown because the only thing heavier than his smile was his sorrow. He called it The Clown because he understood performing tricks often makes the wrong people laugh. He called it The Clown because look at the album cover. He called it the clown because he knew most of us want to see how the magic works until we've seen it.
Hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hmm. Yeah, that one gets me too, the way the Muhammad Ali one does. There's something just like uneasy underneath the surface. And obviously clowns kind of naturally call that, but that last line, the last line of seeing the way things work until we see it. And then
Yeah.
and in Charles Mingus, I mean, to take that another direction too, and in a less haunting way, is a genius. Like to see the way that music unfolds, like you would be like you'd it might freak you out to like to see the way that this music, or to actually be able to fathom, or be conscious of the way that he composed and what he was composing. Is spiritual, might wreck you.
To quote another famous poet, T.S. Eliot wrote, "Mankind cannot handle too much reality." And
Mhm.
I think about that when I think about, bebop and post-bop jazz in particular. It's like, yeah, I understand why a lot of people can't grapple with this because you have to come correct. You have to understand the time that's been spent, that these masters of their instruments improvising and performing together on this tightrope. It's not for everyone, and to fathom the hard work that goes into being any kind of artist. And I think it's fair to say any type of human being, especially in a capitalist environment, like just to live and try to be a good person is a very challenging prospect. So the people that have given us beauty, we owe such a debt to. And
Mhm.
what I'm concerned with in particular is so many of the people that have brought us beauty were done wrong by the powers that be and their brothers and sisters. And through that struggle, persevered and managed to create beautiful things.
Yeah.
Um, Charles Mingus experienced a lot of pain to do what he did, and I feel that pain. I've studied that pain, but also it fills me with joy. That alone is such a powerful, to me, that's a very religious and spiritual thing
Mhm.
that he channeled that pain into something amazing and it's actually enriched my life. Like I have to pay attention to that and do more
Wow.
than just, go in a chat room and venerate him. I need to try to make sure that my voice is added to the handful that are really acolytes.
Well, I love that. And I'll say to those of you watching, if you haven't read the previous books of Sean's, The Black and Blues, Rhapsody in Blue, and This Kind of Blue, Blues,
Kinds of blue.
Kinds of Blue,
Yeah.
um, you just will discover so many wonderful um artists, musicians. Uh, to me, it's always enlightening to read your poems. Like I said, with the Mingus ones, I went immediately and started listening to the music, and that was a new experience for me. But also the way that you have in this whole project taken um, taken it upon yourself to shine a light on others and their genius and their struggles and the injustice that has been that they have faced. Some of them quite heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Um,
I think we artists, right? Like I just caught myself, we artists, but those of us that create, there is a real sense of solidarity and wanting to celebrate achievement. I think those of us that are part of the literary community, which you and I care deeply about and have talked about a lot on a number of occasions, want one another to succeed. We want to support one another. I think these are noble kind of artistic goals, but also they're just noble human goals.
yeah,
Wanting to lend a hand, send a shout out, be a little generous. These are the gestures that make, I think, some of the craziness that we're just inundated with a little bit easier to navigate. So there's a spirit of there's definitely a spirit of celebration and wanting to shine a light on worthy subjects. And like I said, with all sincere modesty, if some of these um, collections are just doing the work of turning people on to a Thelonious Monk or a Mingus or a Billie Holiday, I'll take that. That's not only job well done. I still feel I'm in debt because those those musicians have made my life so much better.
Yeah.
It seems like a good use of resources.
Yeah. Well, I'll say too about what you're talking about with if we about being if we spend our time just trying to be better human beings or nicer people, and in our capitalist society, it's like, if you're talking about writing, say, and you talk to other writers even, but anybody, and you say, I'm a writer, the first question you get is, oh, what have you published? Or what book, right? And so, I mean, I don't
Sure.
even equate the two necessarily. Like just because you publish doesn't make you a writer.
Yeah.
I mean, you are a writer, but
Yeah.
someone who's writes is a writer. And I'm just thinking of, again, if our whole, again, in capitalist society, it's like production, the product, the number of the number of followers, likes, blah, 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 this whole thing.
Yeah.
Whereas someone who would quietly sit and spend thousands of hours making music, making poetry,
Yeah.
cannot help but be changed by that in a great way. But we never ask or even stop to wonder the thousands of hours doesn't if you didn't publish a book or put out a bestseller, maybe you didn't even want to do that, but
Yeah.
we don't even appreciate that. And I don't want to go off on that, but that's kind of part of our
Sure.
mythology too. It's like the
Totally.
mythology of either the suffering struggling artist or the one who is blows up and boom boom boom, but there's
Yeah.
everything in the middle ground. There's
Totally. And
most artists.
that's the vast majority, right? Those of
Yeah.
us that are obscure and are unpublished or unrecognized, but do the work. I think that speaks volumes. But I think we can connect a dot to kind of the Ozymandias and the Mingus and what you're talking about. There were artists that existed then in 1957 that made a lot more money that year than Mingus did, whose work has fallen into justifiable obscurity. Just like it's always fun to go back and look at a list of like what were the most popular books the year The Great Gatsby came out. And it's like, wow, Fitzgerald wasn't even like the 100th best-selling author that year and arguably wrote the best book of the 20th century. So some of this is also out of all of our hands,
Yes,
what's
right.
going to endure. And I think that's another reason to encourage everyone that has a creative impulse, get your story told, tell it as well as you can. And if you're doing it for fame and fortune, I mean, hey, I'm right here saying I hope it works out for you, but do it to satisfy yourself.
Yeah,
Share it with the people that are meaningful to you, and who knows where you're going to end up.
right.
But there's the only thing to me that's inexcusable is not taking the time to develop that craft and try to tell your story. Because I
Yeah,
think you'll always be unsatisfied. And what gets measured aside from this 10, 20, 100 years down the road, it's definitely not going to be this.
yeah. That's exactly right. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, we can't help but be changed by what we do.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So do you want to read another poem? Would you read the one I was asking
Hey,
for? It is, I have it. I know what it is. It's Freddie Mercury's Magic.
I'd love to read it. I haven't read this in public, so this will be the first time I've read this poem. So thank you. I will just say by way of introduction, I keep saying Gen X partly because we're Gen Xers, but eh, in a good sense, I think everybody knows who Freddie Mercury is. That there's been movies made about him. He's a beloved figure, should be a beloved figure, a beautiful, at times tortured human being. But what I was trying to do with this poem is kind of I mean, I hope that all of the individual poems are microcosms of the methodology, but this one in particular is really trying to take a moment in time that I hope if you didn't live through it, it'll resonate or at least will make sense. But I think for Gen Xers that were college age or thereabouts in the early 90s, when Freddie Mercury tragically died of AIDS. Um, there's a lot of nuggets in here that are very deliberate and shout outs both to Queen songs and lyrics, but just these cultural touchstones of what our world was like in a time that was definitely more innocent, but also very, very complicated and scary. So enough said, but this is Freddie Mercury's Magic. There was nothing bohemian about the early 90s. A rhapsody of dollar drafts, pegged jeans, and happy hours featuring free wings, hairspray, Dracar Noir, and other chemically assembled abominations. And smoke, always the smoke. We knew it was going to kill us, but so was everything else, like wars and politicians and day jobs and cops, and all of a sudden, simply having sex. Keep yourself alive? We thought we were all going to die, even or especially the compulsive sorts who actually wore condoms. Here we were, caught in a landslide called fin de siècle, and suddenly this insanity from Africa, where we'd learned in college everything came from anyway, no matter what motion pictures or the Bible said. A kind of magic. Monkey business always a big hit in America. Crazy little thing. The planet finally wiped out for love, no less, or at least fucking, which is what we lived for in the first place. Why us, we cried, thinking of the 60s or even the 80s, when sex was expensive, but seldom an accessory, a little body language now a matter of life and death. What had we wrought? Rock not so hard after all. And if movie stars could die, what hope did frat boys have? Magic was tragic, even sports gods getting waylaid by weird science. Play the game, a motto for every anonymous romp. Experiments some of us hoped might lead to something more serious. Not marriage so much as monogamy, where we could be the heroes of our own stories, the lives we saved our own, etc. The show must go on, we knew, so we drank and rode dirty. Hangovers now including the occasional blood test at a free clinic. Stay positive, we didn't say. Is this the real life? Russian roulette in the sheets and nuclear winter in our shorts. Joking about the gay flu, not so funny anymore. Spare him his life from this monstrosity. Nothing really matters until a hijacked plane crashes in your backyard. All of us, potential terrorists, hoping a little STD might be as bad as it ever got. Just say no, we couldn't say. And it seemed like all the dead ancestors were biting back, a reminder of medieval times when plagues ate your face and wiped out world history. Who wants to live forever? We boasted, half in the bag, all judgment suspended so we could get in someone's pants. Don't stop me now, we pouted, willing to believe in God or even George Bush if that would buy us more time. Another one bites the dust. Everything commercials and songs taught us to demand ending before us, lethargy or before ending us before lethargy or adulthood even had a chance. I want it all, each of us declared in our own style, hoping Freddie had taken one for the team, a dirty saint made to suffer so we could sin on, lip syncing his songs as we drove blind toward whatever destiny had designed.
Oh, wow. Another zinger at the end. Wow, what a last line.
Ah, thank
Jeez.
you.
So many wonderful last lines in these poems. And I love this poem because of what I had talked about earlier, just the all of your cultural allusions, but also you have the embedded, song lyrics from Queen,
Yeah,
and it just makes it's like you just see it coming, and the way and you do it seamlessly. You put them in like it's not like you're reaching for, caught in a landslide, for example. It's not, but it's like
I,
that's a lyric. It's wonderful. So I appreciate that. And then also it just puts me back at that time when AIDS was hitting and affecting people who had never really had, a segment of the population who felt like immortal, like,
yeah.
and changing so much of our dynamics and the way we had to, to go about things in our lives. And so I think that's what I really were many of the things that I appreciated about this poem, why I wanted to hear it.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that you responded, we're the same age and lived through kind of the same era. I think that I had a lot of fun with that poem, especially in the context of the book, because it's we're talking about the 80s turning into the 90s. But speaking of myths, like the myths we tell ourselves, especially young college dudes, and there was this genuine myopic self-pity, like if we had lived in the 60s, man, it was free love, and here we're gonna get AIDS. It's like, first of all, what a privilege to that's your concern, not putting food on the table or being sent to Vietnam like college kids in the 60s. So even within that moment of self-pity and just typical narcissism, thinking it was like it's the Black Plague of the 20th century. And it's like, if you practice safe sex, you're probably gonna be okay. But what was really happening
Right.
was, the gay community was being ravaged and people were
Yes.
dying. So even within the moment, we were kind of the collective we were like thinking about our partying and our, hooking up. And it was like
Yep.
this was a real issue that the government for many years didn't even acknowledge. The Reagan
Yeah.
administration went years without even paying mind because it was assumed this is a gay disease. And if you're not gay, you're not going to get it. And I mentioned Magic a few times. Magic
Yes.
Johnson, of course,
Right.
announcing
Right.
I remember vividly my peers and I all assuming, not, without reason, like I didn't know Magic Johnson was gay. That's what it took to unpackage, like, he isn't gay. Not that it would matter if he was, but this is something that straight people can get. And that was a real reckoning. And it was a moment of demarcation where we all knew, like, this is getting very real.
Yeah.
So I wanted to have fun with that instead
Yeah.
of going down a really dark,
Yeah.
because it was a dark time, but it was also,
Yeah.
the time of our lives.
Well, I appreciated it being pointed out, reading this too, going, yeah, what a buffoon. Like, because I think I had those same thoughts, and it was just like,
Sure.
how ridiculous,
Yeah.
um, to be, and how privileged that now I can be worried about,
Yeah.
not hooking up as liberal, I mean, that's just ridiculous. So
Yeah.
anyway, I appreciated a little bit of, the takedown, from that and pointing out where we were. And you have other moments in this collection, which again has made it such a real pleasure to read. Thinking specifically about the scene from, Platoon,
Hmm.
right? So, I mean, it's such an iconic scene of Eli. Am I getting the right movie?
A lot. Yeah, Elias.
Elias.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we for those of us of our age, a certain generation, we see that we conjure it immediately. And the
Yeah.
way again you take that on, and I think you take it down in a lot of ways. You take down Scorsese, correct? I might get the right director.
Oliver Stone.
Oliver Stone, sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, you're
Yeah.
taking it on, and again, that goes to that myth making. And I was
Yeah.
wondering, you also say in your, um, that in pop culture is where our myths live. That's a quote from you. Our myths
Yeah.
live in our pop culture, and so a poem like this one, and a poem like again the one that, I forget the title of it because I didn't write it down, but where you're talking about that scene from Platoon
Yep.
and the director and the choices that they make and how that goes into our whole myth making. Maybe you speak to that a little bit, and also this
Yeah.
idea that pop culture and those moments like that is where our myths live.
So again, it's such a great. I mean, all the questions are great, Justin. I adore talking about this stuff with you, but that brings up something I'm delighted to kind of address because it's so easy. It's teed up for me. There's a handful of poems that not only address war, but address war as it's handled in movies. And the through line is that whether we're talking about, Elias, who's the good guy, and his very dramatic death is, a ready-made, you can see Oliver Stone like polishing the Oscar when he directed that, like, oh, that's gonna do it. But much more, of much more concern is a movie like Apocalypse Now, which is one of my favorites. But you look at someone like the recently departed Robert Duvall's, Kilgore. He is a caricature of a caricature, but we look at the current imbroglio that our Secretary of War, he's imitating a lampooned figure. So we're so through the rabbit hole that someone like Kilgore in that movie was channeling like a Vietnam or even an earlier era tough general and a pastiche of like, I don't care if there's bombs exploding. Well, there was some truth to that because those were the people that Courage Under Fire. Now we have people, and I address this in the book, imitating Colonel Kilgore and Gordon Gekko, and it's like both of those characters were very satirical jibes at how over the top things had
Right,
gotten.
right.
So you can't satirize that, right? You can't
Yeah.
satirize Pete Hegseth, and but you can take a poem and say that's where we are now. We're no longer even modeling ourselves on, whoever Eisenhower or Patton. We're imitating people from Top Gun and Apocalypse Now. It's appalling. It's funny. It's tragic. It's all of that.
Yeah. Gosh, when you put it that way.
I mean, the Apocalypse Now poem, it again, it's we talk about the Ali poem. It's a lot of
Yeah,
fun to peel that onion because once you
yeah,
start, it just doesn't stop. Like
yeah.
within the movie, the Robert Duvall character, right, Kilgore, plays Wagner, which again is meant to
Yes.
be so over the top. But the song he's playing, Ride of the Valkyries, is from a Wagner that is about war and the Valkyries ascending to heaven. It's like this is the myth of the warrior and the glory that awaits. And the reality, of course, is that whether that's religiously true or not, who gets sent to get killed? It's the young innocent men and women. Um, we don't tend to mythologize them. We have these leaders making tough decisions. Um, and that's not just poetry, right? We can go no further than another recently departed, Ozzy Osbourne and Black Sabbath's War Pigs. That's 1970. That's 10 years before Apocalypse Now,
Mm,
calling it out. And
mm.
that's poetry saying these are the bozos that are making these life and death decisions and very cavalier about it. It's always fodder for, again, I won't even say creatives, I'll say sensitive people to be appalled by and try to speak out against.
I just, I don't know how people throughout history keep getting away with it. How does it happen that they just continue and that we keep falling, we collectively keep falling for the same BS, to pump us up, national, all our fervor and, okay, we're behind it.
Yeah.
Um, it just blows my mind that we don't seem to catch on.
Well, and you know what I'll say, Justin, that tees up another what I would say is I think therefore we can't be apathetic and
Yeah.
we and perhaps a heavy-handed argument on social media might not move the needle too much. But one thing we know that powerful men and dictators hate more than anything else being ignored or being made fun of. And
Mhm.
you know, there's a lot of dead serious topics and poetry in here,
Yeah.
but there's absolutely a full-hearted attempt to lampoon and make fun of men like Musk and Bezos and some of these cretins, and
Kissinger.
that, yeah, and that
Yeah.
helps. I think that begins to help, not my poems, but
Yeah.
this work that we do is a way to help puncture some of that mythology so that we don't
Great.
continue to repeat. We may very well, right? Ozymandias to the Iran conflict, like, yeah, there's certain things that just keep happening, but that doesn't mean that we can or should sit back and go, it's inevitable, so what can we
Yeah.
do about it? I think
Great.
we respond to it and we find our own humanity. If we can't locate it in other areas, we can find our humanity, and I find a lot of solace and purpose in that.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you. And I would say maybe as a way to ride out here, um, how do we, and you've kind of answered that a bit, but how do we push back against this myth, this story the collective, I don't even think we are telling, it's being told to us in a lot of ways. We're being told the
Yeah.
story. And so how do we say push back? How can we create our own myths, our own communities within myths?
Yeah.
Because myths, the wonderful thing about myths is that they are sustaining. They should support us. And I
Yeah.
think, and this is just occurring to me now. I think my reaction to the United States for many well, almost all of my life has been that myth does not sustain me. There's nothing in here that feeds me. It doesn't uplift me. It doesn't, I don't believe it. I see through it. Um, so, and maybe that comes back to the power of art being that sustaining. We are our own, we can create our own myths within ourselves, for ourselves, our families, our friends, with our
Yeah,
communities. Anyway, I hope I didn't answer this for you, but I'm putting it out there to you as we kind of
yeah.
to wrap this up. What can we do?
I mean, I think it brings it full circle. I think, you said beautifully earlier the act of bearing witness, asking questions, telling our stories, telling underserved community stories, celebrating icons and personal heroes that warrant that kind of celebration. To me, these are all necessary acts. They're acts of defiance, they're acts of celebration, but they're also, flares in the darkness. I can't stress enough. I don't have any illusions that me writing poems about Charles Mingus is going to rescue his reputation or turn people onto jazz. But if it does one person, I think about it and invoke that, the whole starfish parable. It's like you can't save everyone or you can't do everything, but one at a time, good things can happen. So to me, I find, the fact that poets and creatives aren't self-mythologizing, tend to be very humble for a lot of good reasons. Like
Yeah, yeah,
I'm humble, and it's for a lot of good reasons that I'm humble, but by keeping it real and understanding what our limitations are and not wanting to be powerful, whatever that even means, we build and find and sustain community. So I think even just being a kind, caring person in 2026 is an act of defiance. It's an act of rebellion, and it's
Mhm,
an act of love. So
mhm.
creating art, celebrating art, encouraging others to share art, making art accessible, while recognizing these are modest. We've got to feed the homeless, we've got to provide shelter, we've got to allow women to vote. Like we need to do so many things on so many levels, but if we're working together toward that goal, I think progress is being made no matter what the headlines say.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, Sean, you're doing that. You're supporting so many writers in so many ways. And this project, certainly, all of these books, and this one, the latest, Red, White, and Blues, um, in this project, you are celebrating, you are bearing witness. Beautiful work. And again, thanks for letting me talk with you about it. And oh, where can people get this?
So you can go to my website for some links at seanmurphy.net. Your favorite online retailers are or will be carrying it. I can't at this moment since it's hot off the presses, but some of the familiar places that you would look, you'll be able to find it. And then in stores, I think eventually. So yeah, check it out. Let me know what you think. Subscribe to Justin's Substack and feed. Check me out. And by the way, I would be remiss. I want to end on a note. Justin, if you hold those books up again, there's one thing that you'll find in common from some of these pictures, and I think this also answers the question that Justin teed up, which is what else can we do? The last three poetry collections, Rhapsodies in Blue, which he held up, Kinds of Blue, and Red, White, and Blues, all feature images from amazing photographs taken by Justin that you can find at justinahren.com that have been worked on through with Morgan Ryan, the creative director, not only of 1455 and 1455 books, but like a personal friend. She has her hands in everything. So taking Justin's beautiful work and then Morgan shaping it into something that's ready for consumption, that is also this wonderfully collaborative act. To me, it feels very authentic and organic. It feels very human, and it's also very beautiful. So this is not AI. This is not manufactured by a bean counter in a boardroom. This is an attempt, again, however modest, but very genuine, to take beautiful work that's already been done and find ways to make it work together. And I think we are demonstrating, again, in our very humble but beautiful way, that we can make amazing things together and get outside of parameters and continue to explore like how can we all kind of build a nurturing community? And this is proof we can do it. So yay for us and everyone else that's watching, join the party.
Yeah, thank you.
So
Amen.
thank you, Justin. Thanks for always having my back and being willing and able to talk about this stuff. I love it, and we will certainly talk more because that's just what we do.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Sean.
Everybody, thanks for being here, and we'll see you again soon. Take care. Be safe.